Hello, people of Earth. I'm Bright Garlic, and welcome to episode 4 of the E.T. and I podcast. This episode is titled The Dystopian Cosmos versus How It Really Is. Today is Tuesday, the 2nd of April 2024, and I'm recording on a grey, overcast, kind of coolish, first real feeling autumn day. And I'd like to start today's episode by thanking those of you who have taken a subscription to the podcast, which of course began with today's episode. It's my wish that you've enjoyed the free content up to now and that you'll find the paid content equally worth paying for and worth listening to. From now on, most months, there should be 2 to 4 hours of paid content. So sit back and enjoy today's episode. The reptilians from the Draco constellation and the Orionids from the Orion constellation are fighting the Galactic Federation of Light in a battle to take over Earth. The Greys are a dying race that need our genetics in order to survive, so it means they're going to have to harvest sperm, ova, and fetuses to save their kind. After that, they're going to want our resources and our planet. The Archons, who are not in our dimension but beyond the physical dimension, are orchestrating a grand chess game on Earth and in space so that they can harvest our souls and help the Dracos and Orionids to take over the galaxy. The Greys also want our souls because they have none, and we have juicy souls that they're envious of. All sound familiar? This is the kind of crap that saturates the internet and human minds in the early 21st century. If you believe any of this rubbish, chances are then you probably believe that we're living in a dystopian cosmos where there's a grand battle of good versus evil and where humans must choose sides. It's great entertainment in the Star Wars universe and the Star Trek universe, but it's nothing but human fiction. As above, so below is the phrase that many people typically use to justify why they believe that we live in a cosmos where good is at war with evil. If there is evil above, it must be below, and if it is below, it must be above. This phrase reportedly comes from the brief Hermetic text, the Emerald Tablet, which is a foundational text for alchemists in both Islamic and European countries. It first appeared in the Arabic Hermetic Tablet, the Book of Causes. The phrase was supposedly created, drafted, written, said by Hermes Trismegistus, who was in itself a synthesis of Greek and Egyptian deities and wise personalities, a kind of fictitious personification of wisdom, who may also possibly have been an actual pagan prophet. And the original phrase in Arabic was not as above, so below, but that which is above is from that which is below, and that which is below is from that which is above, which, if you're a magician or an alchemist, is a kind of instruction to help you understand the interconnectedness of all things. So not only do people who throw this phrase around have an incorrect knowledge and understanding of the original phrase, they almost completely invert its original meaning and pervert it into meaning something completely different. But it's not just crazy people who have suggested that we live in a cosmos where there is good and evil engaged in a perpetual battle. There are many apparently normal and some supposedly highly intelligent people who have suggested that we ought to be wary of aliens, none less prominent than the former theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking. So what kind of cosmos do we live in? Do we live in a dystopian cosmos where there is a perpetual battle between good and evil? Or do we live in a benevolent cosmos where such divisions don't exist? Or do we live in an indifferent cosmos, as some have suggested? Or might we live in a different kind of cosmos altogether that is beyond simple labels like dystopian, benevolent, good and evil and indifferent? I learned a long time ago that we live in a cosmos where there is only ignorance and awareness, different degrees of ignorance and different degrees of awareness. A cosmos where so-called good and evil, substitute here ignorance and awareness, are in all beings and only manifest in life forms who are planet-bound, where those who are spacefaring have transcended the capacity to do harm unto others. I arrived at this conclusion logically as an adolescent after many years of thinking about the subject and observing the world. Then later, when I began to meet ETs, I arrived at the same conclusion. A small period of minor uncertainty initially arose leading up to my experiences of the 19th of January 2011, and during that experience I asked both the Telia and the Sawandi about so-called reptilians and hostile ETs, and was gently educated about the naiveness of such beliefs. And they were explained in full as to how those beliefs came to be over thousands of years. At that point, I didn't really think that either reptilians or hostile spacefaring ETs existed, but I didn't know for sure, so I needed to ask those who would know. After that experience, and my experience of being taken to merge with the light, which occurred later in that event, all uncertainty was removed. Later, when I spent time on ET craft and time on NLCI 35, I began to see and experience how things are firsthand, and I had many discussions with ETs and their sentient intelligences both on their craft and on NLCI 35 about the true nature of the cosmos. I've now had 13 trips to NLCI 35 and spent a considerable amount of time on numerous craft among many ETs and on NLCI 35 with the NELSA and with other ETs, and have seen and learned nothing that would suggest that we live in a dystopian cosmos. If anything, what I have seen and learned would suggest that we live in a cosmos that is brimming with benevolence, kindness, and love, where individual ETs and ET races will go out of their way to help others who are ready to grow up and to take responsibility. I had initially scribbled down some notes for this session, and then after I did that, I had a long session with various AIs to see what they thought of the subject of the nature of the cosmos. I had thought to present both my own opinion and that of the AI, but I was unhappy that in places the AI was merely feeding back what we humans thought about the subject and was unable to be original and logical in its thinking. Then it occurred to me that I should ask my NELSA friend, who I refer to as Dude, what he had to say on the subject. So rather than saying any more about what I think on the subject, and I did write down extensive notes, here's what Dude had to say on the subject. Okay, Bryant, consider this. As a species or a race evolves and develops the ability to become spacefaring, there are certain changes that take place. Psychological changes, emotional changes, physical changes, and spiritual changes that take place when you go in space and experience everything. The net effect of this is that a species changes significantly after spending time in near-planet orbit, or as they go a little further out, the changes become more significant. After a period of time of these changes occurring, there are changes not just in those going off-world, but those learning about it on planet. So changes become planet-wide in that particular species. In some species, it takes a short time, in others, a long time. The end result is that there is growth, psychological, emotional, physical, and spiritual growth. Once there has been growth, it affects what happens in those explorations, and it also affects what happens in the relationships they have with other ETs. Once they have contact with other ETs, they are then affected by those relationships. They go through all these forms of growth, psychological, emotional, physical, and spiritual, and that once again becomes planet-wide. And over time, varying from species to species, from a short time to a long time, there is a gradual spiral that's developing, enveloping all of those previous aspects of growth. Now, Bright, consider this. There is a spiral of sorts of growth that comes about from exploring space and meeting ETs. Once you as a species realize you are part of something much larger, there are certain changes that take place in you as a species and as individuals. Changes will come about from what you've experienced with ETs and experienced on other worlds. These changes are multifaceted and move through from the individual to the entire collective. As a result, they affect the direction you are heading as individuals and as a collective. Now, in the early phases of this, there is often resistance, which comes from holding on to old beliefs, but gradually, over periods of time, the resistance subsides. Once it subsides, there is additional growth that takes place, and then new possibilities open up for individuals and the species regarding space travel and exploration and inhabiting other worlds, visiting other worlds and meeting other ETs. It's only when that resistance is gone that this can happen. So, how is it really in the cosmos? How do other species behave, act? How do they treat one another? How do they treat their worlds? How do they treat other worlds? And what is their nature overall? It's simple. When you're immature, you see differences and not connection. When you grow up, you go through particular stages of letting go of old beliefs and old ways of acting. When you finally mature, you understand that despite your differences, that you are all connected and that there is only one. So what happens is you begin to take responsibility for your actions, the impact of your beliefs and values, and the way that you treat others, whether they are ETs or other species on the planet. If you grow up, you get more opportunities. If you don't grow up, the opportunities stop. So if you want what everyone else has got, you have to grow up. If you remain brutal and bullying and dominating, the collectives will not allow you the freedom to explore, to meet ETs, and to do all the things you want to do because you're a liability to the peaceful coexistence of other life forms. So it's very simple, and every species will have that choice. If you use logic, you will arrive at the same conclusion. Now let's consider the other side, that there's hostility in the cosmos spreading everywhere, dominant species types taking over and controlling everything, starting with planets to entire regions of space, maybe even galaxies and more. A dystopian cosmos. Let's explore the logic behind this. To start with, it means that every individual or some individuals must believe in this ideology. So what does that imply? Number one, there is ignorance. the implications of which are as follows. A, that they are not aware of how they are to others, or that they are related to others or depend on others. B, they cannot see that they need others for their very survival. C, that the harm they cause will come back and harm themselves, whether that is individually or collectively. Number 2, lack of concern for the greater good, the implications of which are as follows. A, only self matters individually and collectively. B, that others do not matter individually and collectively. C, in getting my needs met individually and collectively, I will be taking away from the needs or wants of others if I do not act in a way that is responsible, that is, considerate of others. D, a lack of appreciation of the nuances of the dependencies that they have in each of their ordinary individual lives or the life of the species. Number 3, a lack of understanding how the broader systems that support life work, the implications of which are as follows. A, that they will act however they please individually and collectively. B, that they will create collapses in basic resources due to a collapse in ecosystems upon which they depend, the implications of which are that they will keep looking for resources and that there will be conflict over resources. C, they will not understand why catastrophe comes to their door, how they cause things to get worse, and as a result, they will keep doing the same thing. D, they will have no appreciation how disturbances in particular systems, biological, social, and what you might think of as temporal spatial, in other words, the bubble in which they exist, how these things are codependent on each other, and how when one system begins to fail or break down or to throw up anomalies, then others will do the same. Number 4, that at some point they are going to subsume or consume a particular species that will, for whatever reason, contain something that will contaminate or disturb what it is that they have created with their own collective. Now that thing may take on any number of qualities or aspects, and it can be psychological, emotional, physical, spiritual, a particular belief or value, a particular story or myth, a particular way of doing things, a particular behavior, a particular way of making choices, or maybe something as simple as a way of understanding things, whatever they are. But once that contaminant is in the collective, it has the capacity to destroy that collective from the inside out. The implications of the contaminant are: A, it can change the cohesiveness of a collective, and in so doing create different groups, each with their own ways of functioning, their own priorities, and their own willingness to be part of that collective. In other words, fractures begin to appear in the collective, and those fractures abrade, have friction against one another, and can lead to a total breakdown, be it via some form of conflict individually or collectively, and cessation of the cohesiveness of the collective. B, particular contaminants can infiltrate critical aspects of the dominant species' psychological, emotional, or spiritual functioning and have negative consequences, and those in turn can lead to fracturing. C. Now, for every particular contaminant, and there are countless forms, it can happen that those contaminants can take hold among other species. They may have an appeal for one reason or another. They will then be transferred to the other species in many different ways. the same contaminant can be transferred in different ways. And so as a result of the different species that pick it up and the different forms of transmission, is what you get is a different manifestation of that particular contaminant as opposed to what it was where it started. So in other words, it differentiates. Now, sometimes that differentiation can continue so that there is an entire spectrum of different forms of manifestation of that contaminant, and any one of them can lead to a fracture in the cohesiveness of the whole collective. So what you see is that individual contaminants can be very dangerous to the cohesiveness of such a collective. But bear in mind that usually there are many contaminants of different types, and collectively or together as a whole, they have a very powerful effect on the cohesiveness of that particular collective. So it could be near impossible for them to stay together to maintain integrity. Note: totalitarian control of such a system, even these things are prey to contaminants and eventually break down for the same reason. Number 5. Right, consider this. The more you subsume or take over or try to control, the more you stretch your resources so that each resource has to do more work. So ultimately, there's only so far you can go before things break down. So, at a certain point, you've stretched your resources to maintain control, keep things alive, to break point. And the effort that takes puts a great deal of pressure on the entire system, in this particular situation, the collective. Now, at that point, when you do that, you put pressure on the weak points, whatever they might be. Now, some are fractures that result from contaminants. Others are other kinds of fractures. Some are weak points associated with the normal infrastructure, shall we say, of maintaining that system of control. And others relate to fundamental resources. So when each of these weak points has pressure applied to it, something will give. And when one thing gives, other things will give eventually. And then the system is prone to collapse. In other words, the control over the collective as it weakens and the whole collective loses its cohesiveness and collapses. No more system, no more collective. End of the evil empire. Number 6. There are times when, for no particular reason, in other words, many reasons that may be invisible acting one at a time or together in different combinations, such collectives encounter internal divisions in ideology, and this is regarding the subsuming of other species or beings. Now, this can happen spontaneously because individuals do have spontaneous thoughts that become ideas and they can catch on, or it can be because, as I said, there are one or more reasons that are unseen. Now, some of these are natural, related to celestial cycles, and some of them are artificial, and they are related to the internal dynamics of the collective. And these can be the result of the subsuming species or the influence of another species, even if there is no contact between the two, but there are some influences that are occurring psychically, that is, energetically from individual to individual or species to species. Such things can occur because every mind has the capacity, the capability of perceiving the minds of or the parts of the functioning of minds of other species, whether conscious or unconscious. So what you have are the flow-on effects of individual and collective thoughts and ideas and beliefs affecting others from different species. Now, typically, the way that this works is that it begins with simple thoughts, simple ideas. Simple ideas like, how does one feel about one's experience? Now, these things, when transmitted, can snowball and create more significant thoughts, ideas, and beliefs. So the net effect of this transmission is that different entities start thinking, ideating, believing, acting, behaving, practicing, institutionalizing different things, and that can cause serious fractures in a particular dominant species. Now, once these fractures form, it can spell the end. Sometimes there will be more control exerted, but sometimes thoughts, ideas, beliefs spread like wildfire, and there is no controlling them, no containing them, and the damage is done. Number 7. You will find different groups that have been subsumed, consumed, will continue to believe certain things. Now, in order for belief to be maintained, there must be 3 things. First, there must be the ability for stories to continue, where they remain the same or diversify and adapt. Stories must continue in order for particular beliefs to have a solid foundation and for them to provide meaning to a person's life or a collective of any size. Second, is a determination not to be obliterated, totally consumed, and for all that was to be annihilated. Third, it must have a function, and I will give you 4. It must provide meaning to the person, the people. It must synthesize the world in a way that makes sense. It must be able to adapt to changing circumstances in a way that is useful and supports a person's daily experience. It must also provide them with something important that can help build relationships. So collectively, these particular functions make belief important, and some beliefs will be more important than others. So there is a continuance of beliefs, whether the same or changed, adapted to having been subsumed. What are the implications of this? A is that those beliefs give those people, that collective, something to hold on to when they feel domination is at its worst. So you could call that a subtle resistance. Now that resistance can become more overt, but it cannot do so without the initial belief. B. There are times when, for whatever reason, particular beliefs will be very common and very important to individuals and to a collective people. And what you see time and time again in planet-bound species is that the greater the oppression, the more importance is attached to those core beliefs regarding who they are and their survival. So, more pressure, the stronger the reaction regarding the belief. Now, second, regarding that is that certain common beliefs come about when other beliefs have been destroyed. So think of belief like an ecosystem. There are predators and prey. When one prey is taken, another thrives. When it is taken, another thrives. When a predator is taken or destroyed, different prey thrive. So similar with belief. It is always in flux as a response to the conditions that particular individuals and people live with. Now, in the case of oppression, it brings critically important beliefs to the fore. Now, some of those will benefit and some of those will not. There are also opportunities where common beliefs are replaced by radically different beliefs, and this will reflect what else is happening in the individual or the collective species life. Now, sometimes when there is a radical change like this, what you see is flow-on effects in how particular people relate to the oppressors. And remember, there are different forms of oppression. Some are much more subtle, others are much more overt. When changes like this happen, regarding belief, the relationship with the oppressors will also change, and there are occasions when the shift in a particular belief is so powerful as to affect changes in behavior in the oppressed people that change the dynamic with the oppressor and make it much more difficult for them to oppress. And again, such things cause fractures and extend the system to a point where it cannot maintain being stretched for very long without breaking. So this demonstrates the importance of belief and how certain changes in belief can challenge autocratic systems and create fractures and further division, not just within the oppressor, but others who are being oppressed. And in this way, the infectious nature of belief within a species and between species can be a very potent ingredient for causing destruction of oppressive regimes and collectives. Number 8. All right, in order to maintain a dystopian cosmos with good versus evil, oppressors and non-oppressors, you need several ingredients. First, a group that is willing to pursue its own needs without care for anyone else, and that can be scaled up to an entire collective of millions of species. Second, an unwillingness to soften one's opinions or views of others. In other words, you must be highly judgmental, and that has to infiltrate the entire collective. For without, there can be no collective, no cohesiveness. So imagine you have millions of species working together with this attitude. Third, you have to have the resources to maintain such a battle, be they mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, regarding the body or material resources. And you have to have the ability to funnel those resources into this eternal fight. Now, whilst you're doing that, you're taking away resources from other more important things like survival. Fourth, you need a unifying belief that transcends all differences between species, that unifies them with a conviction that they are right and that others are wrong. So this particular set of beliefs, or belief, if a singular belief is possible like that, must overcome all differences in how individual species function psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually, and how they relate to one another. In other words, it must have the ability to eradicate all the conditioning of their history and to offer them something that is completely novel and better than they had before. So a belief that is better than anything they had before. That's a tall order when you consider that you're talking about millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, even more highly developed species in the cosmos, regardless of whether they're fit to be in space. Now, theoretically, the odds of finding such a unifying belief are astronomical. Now, the likelihood of achieving any single one of those, let alone all of them, is almost zero, beyond comprehensible, and most unlikely in any possible universe. Note, the way things actually are is different because ETs accept differences in belief. There is no effort made to forcibly unify people, provided they abide by the constraint that says, do no harm to others. It is a unifying belief, but it benefits everybody, whereas the other form does not. Number 9. I have a simple question for you, Bright. If there are countless planets in countless spaces, that is, other universes, and on each of those planets there is just one life form capable at some point of becoming spacefaring, how is it possible that even one of them could become dominant without others pulling them up and saying, that's not right, we won't allow you to do that? Could it be that they emerge so slowly there's no one around to see them emerge and become dominant? No, it couldn't, and this is why. Because despite the sense of things emerging slowly, there are other universes with beings traveling from other universes. So everything is noticed. Nothing goes missed. Okay, so the point here is that nothing happens in isolation, whether you perceive it or not. There is always someone watching. So the implication of the model we've been discussing is that no one is watching. And what does that mean? It means that for every life form that emerges and is ready to become spacefaring, they have done it themselves entirely throughout their entire existence with no help at all for anything. They have arisen with no prior involvement in the creation of their world or life on that world, and they have done so without attracting anyone else's attention. Okay, so whilst this sounds plausible in a vast cosmos with many universes and many conjoined spaces, the possibility is zero. There is always someone somewhere. If not known by others initially, it will eventually be known. But the reality is that for this to exist, it means two things. Either that particular universe is completely devoid of other spacefaring beings, and any universes connected to that universe are also devoid of other spacefaring beings, as are all the conjoined spaces connected with that universe or the other universes. And second, it implies that if anyone else does exist, that they do not care enough to pay attention or provide assistance in the development of that particular species of life form. So you can see that for such a world to exist, such a people to exist, requires astronomical odds, things that are almost impossible. I say almost because no one can know for sure that such a universe has not arisen in which these variables occurred. But there is none, to my knowledge, that fits this particular model, and certainly that isn't how the cosmos is. And even if such a universe did exist, others will know about it. Other life forms could know about it and would be curious about its existence. I would conclude that although there is a minuscule fraction of its existence possible, it does not exist in actuality, only in potentiality, and will never exist in actuality. All right, so I have a few more comments to make outside of this issue. This whole thing we've been speaking about relates to the nature of the cosmos. That is, life in the cosmos. And we are only speaking about life in the loosest possible sense. That is, physical life. There also exists other forms of life. Some of it energetic, some of it formless, some of it on scales and ways that you do not recognize, and some of it in relationship to beings who are experiencing what you would think of as an afterlife. Now, in order to understand each of these, we could go through a similar process of unpacking things. But I would like to suggest that this is not necessary, because each life form, whatever form it is, goes through what you might think of as the experience of growth, in whatever way you want to take that. Now, you could say that physical incarnation is the type of life where growth is slowest, and it is the only one where the tendency towards ignorance is significant in the early parts of its growth. Now, of course, that changes from individual life forms to life forms and individual to individual. Suffice to say that all other kinds of life are to some degree less prone to ignorance. Now, does that mean that deceased humans are not prone to ignorance? No, not at all. And the same is true for planet-bound ETs who have died. However, the critical difference is this. Without the limitations of physical life, deceased individuals have the capacity to understand as they did not have before. For some, it may be a slow process, for others, much quicker. Either way, ignorance has the capacity to be eroded in a way that it did not during physical life. So what you see for the most part is an awareness of the interconnection of the entirety of existence. All beings who have died will see that eventually. Now, does that mean some will not perhaps have a tendency to cause trouble? No, it does not. However, in such instances, opportunities will be created for those individuals to learn about the harm that they cause both to others and to themselves. And the process of teaching this, of demonstrating this, is something that can be achieved much quicker than it can be in physical life. So whilst individuals might remain ignorant for some time, collectives of millions of individuals working together to cause harm does not happen. A, because each individual will be given lessons to learn. B, because others ensure it doesn't happen. C, because the intelligence you think of as God will manifest in such a way as to bring about understanding and insight for such individuals. And D, because eventually every individual changes, and when an individual sees that their own ignorance is not helping them or alleviating suffering, they will seek out other ways of functioning and of behaving. So, could there be a dystopian cosmos with cosmic good versus evil? No, never. The space, the intelligence of that space that you think of as God would not allow its manifestation in any reality. Any manifestation of the sort on a smaller scale is merely temporary and bound to individual planets. The idea that humans have, as above, so below, is a nice dictum, and it relates well to human beings, but to hold it to be true for the entire cosmos is to project human ignorance onto a cosmos that you do not know and that you do not wish to know. So those were Lude's thoughts on the subject, and he articulated it, I believe, far better than I could have articulated. And one thing perhaps is worth saying, and I'm not absolutely sure of this because I didn't ask him, is he was looking at a logical deduction. You know, what are the implications of this model of a dystopian cosmos? And he was being as logical as possible. But the sense that I had was he wasn't reflecting upon evil empires that actually exist in space, because as he said, that can't happen, that's not allowed. What he was reflecting on was what he has observed and what he has learned, what he knows about, what the collectives know about on planets where there is a high degree of ignorance and there are dominant species. So he was taking that and looking at that on a much larger scale as if applied to the cosmos. At least that's my sense of it. If that's not where he was coming from and it was simply logic, I think it's a fairly robust logic. And there are many people. There is a book called Allies of Humanity. I've had a quick look at the whole series. complete load of garbage as far as I can tell. But there are many people who push this whole idea that we need to choose sides because it's a violent, dangerous cosmos. They play to this whole model full of good versus evil. But nowhere in any of the works of these people or in any of the comments they've made on the subject have I heard any form of logic which explains why and how we live in a dystopian cosmos. Instead, all I hear is fear-mongering, choose sides, beware, watch out, or else. There's no logic and there's no foundation in reality. So, with that being said, it's my wish that Dude's comments have helped you and will help you to look more critically at the subject and to evaluate more critically what it is that other people are saying on this subject. One final thing that I would like to leave you with is there are many people who claim to have had traumatic and difficult experiences. What I would like to suggest is that not only what I've said before, that there is a developmental continuum that people go through as they go through more and more experiences, but that we all experience a very rich human condition of which we know perhaps superficially. We don't have any great depth of knowledge and understanding of what that human condition is and how we as human beings work. So these apparently unpleasant, traumatic, hostile experiences really, in my mind, reflect a lack of understanding or awareness of the nature of the self and how the self works. And so I would suggest to people who have had terrible, traumatic experiences, go away and know thyself. Learn about the self. When you learn about the self, when you learn about a human being, you also learn about other phenomena and you learn about other life forms. To know thyself is to know the one. When you understand what it is to be a human being, you understand how we interact with other life forms. And you understand why it is that sometimes we walk away with the perception of an unpleasant experience. Just because you felt that you had an unpleasant experience does not imply that that was a hostile entity. So we must look honestly and deeply at how we function in order to really understand the universe, in order to understand many, many, many things that are beyond our comprehension that exist in this cosmos. If we don't do that, the greatest risk for us is we will project our insecurities and our fears and how we see ourselves in each other onto the cosmos. And as Dude said, we are ignorant of the cosmos. And there's also a cosmos that we really don't wish to know. And if we really want to know that cosmos, we must begin by understanding ourselves. Then we can begin to understand the other. So people of Earth, that's the end of this episode. It's my wish that you've learned a thing or two and gained some small benefit. Feel free to let me know how you felt about this episode, or if you have any opinions to the contrary, or you feel that there was a fairly good argument in favour of us not living in a dystopian cosmos. It's my wish that you have a wonderful day of human life. Cowabunga, people of Earth, I will see you next episode. Take care for now.